She lived her life unseen, a maid drifting through rooms where secrets cost more than diamonds. But today, as a feared crime boss raised his pen over a $150 million contract, Lena Boney saw one flaw in the seal that could destroy him. She had one breath to stop him, and 6 words that might end her. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. The harbor light often made the Grand Mirador Hotel look peaceful, but inside its upper floors the work never slowed. Lena had been moving since dawn. Trays polished, curtains straightened, fresh linen placed in the executive suites. She worked the way others prayed, quiet and steady, hoping each day would be enough to keep her family afloat. To most guests, she was only the woman in the black dress and gray apron who refilled their glasses without disturbing their conversations. There had been a time when she lived a different kind of life. In Palermo, she had studied medieval Sicilian charters and seals under professors who treated old documents like relics. She remembered the cool air of the archive rooms and the dry scent of parchment. She remembered tracing ink strokes written hundreds of years earlier. She had been a top student, someone her mentors believed would one day lead preservation work for the region. Then the bakery collapsed. Her father had stood among silent ovens, staring at the letters from creditors. Her younger brother needed surgery that cost far more than any of them could manage. In a single month, her plans fell apart. University became a luxury they could not afford. Lena packed her books in a cardboard box, kissed her mother goodbye, and left for the city across the water where hotel work paid more than a graduate scholarship. 3 years later, she was 28 and working double shifts to keep her family steady. Fatigue clung to her body, yet she took pride in how carefully she worked. She folded napkins with unwavering focus and carried trays without tilting a glass. If no one noticed the effort, that suited her. Being invisible kept her safe. By mid-afternoon, the hotel's management had begun fussing over an important arrival. Staff whispered that a prominent logistics entrepreneur had booked the executive floor for a private signing. Whisper was a polite word. In truth, they were nervous. Some said the man controlled routes that crossed borders without inspection. Others said he was trying to move his family business toward legitimacy. His name drifted from mouth to mouth. Gustavo Udinese. Lena kept her head down while the others talked, but she listened. She knew enough to understand that men like Gustavo expected precision, discretion, and perfection. Management assigned her to the suite, not only for her competence, but because she spoke several dialects well enough to greet international guests. She accepted without asking questions. The suite was quiet when she entered to prepare the table. Cream curtains framed broad windows. Sunlight softened the edges of the room. A long table covered in a pale cloth sat at the center. Near its end lay a parchment folder sealed with red wax. Lena placed a silver tray at the corner, set down 2 glasses, and stepped back. At 4:30, the door opened. 2 guards entered first, scanning the corners with sharp, quick movements. Gustavo followed, tall and muscular, dressed in a fitted black suit and open white shirt. He moved with the assurance of someone who had spent years watching others get out of his way. His dark hair was combed back, his jaw set in a line that rarely softened. Lena lowered her eyes and waited. Carlo joined moments later. He was older, with salt and pepper hair and a neatly kept beard. His navy suit looked pressed with care, and the calm authority in his expression marked him as someone who had guided Gustavo through many difficult decisions. He greeted Gustavo quietly and took a seat near the parchment. "Everything is ready," Carlo said. The trust confirmed the final figures this morning. Lena set the drinks on the table. Carlo eased open the parchment folder. The document inside looked as old as any she had studied in Palermo. Thick vellum, carefully curved handwriting, a red wax seal stamped with the crest of a noble house from the 17th century. Carlo explained the purpose of the contract, a settlement that resolved a long dispute over a stretch of coastline in Sicily. A new partnership with a heritage restoration trust, $150 million to finalize ownership. He spoke with confidence, as though every detail had been checked twice. The hotel believed the meeting concerned cultural restoration, a gesture toward preserving the past. Lena understood there were larger forces behind the paper. Routes along the coast had value far beyond tourism. Whoever controlled them controlled far more than scenery. She stepped back toward the wall. Her eyes drifted over the parchment again. The red seal caught the light. Something rose inside her, a faint warning like a tug at the edge of memory. She looked closer. The motto circling the crest contained a single letter that had no place in that period. The date line above referenced a saint's feast that did not match the calendar used in that century. And the final stroke of the script had a pause that no chancery scribe would ever make. Her heart began to knock against her ribs. She tried to look away. Her job was to be silent. Speak only when spoken to. The wrong word could cost her everything. The right word might still cost her everything. A memory slipped in her mind. Professor Davide in Palermo hunched over a brittle charter, his voice low as he repeated the rules of authentication. Check the motto. Check the date. Check the pressure of the handwriting. Doubt only when doubt is earned. And if you know the truth, you must say it. She looked at the seal again. She knew the truth. Fear prickled her neck. If she stayed quiet, Gustavo would sign and be trapped by a document he believed real. If she spoke, she might be thrown out or worse. She felt the edges of the decision closing around her like a narrow doorway. Gustavo uncapped the pen. His fingers curled around it with a steady grip. He leaned forward slightly. The room seemed to hold its breath. Carlo folded his hands and watched with satisfaction. Lena stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. Her finger touched the edge of the seal. Questo è falso, signore, she said in clear Sicilian. This is fake. The words cut through the room with a quiet finality. Gustavo froze. His guard straightened, ready to move. Carlo's expression tightened, a flash of irritation followed by disbelief. Lena stood still, her hand steady even as her pulse hammered in her throat. Gustavo lowered the pen and looked at her. His gaze held none of the impatience she expected. It was something far more dangerous. He studied her as if trying to understand what kind of maid could speak with that level of certainty. Explain, he said. The door closed. Chairs shifted. Tension filled the air like heavy smoke. Lena knew there was no turning back now. What she said next would either save her or end whatever life she had left in this hotel. The line she had crossed could not be uncrossed. For a moment the suite held a silence, so complete that even the distant hum of the harbor seemed to vanish. Lena kept her hands still at her sides. Gustavo watched her without blinking, his expression unreadable. The pen rested on the table between them like a blade placed carefully out of reach. Explain, he said again. His voice was calm, but the calm carried weight. It was the kind of stillness that pressed on the lungs. Lena inhaled slowly. The motto in the seal is wrong, she said. The phrase around the crest uses a spelling that came into use a century after this document is supposed to be written. Gustavo leaned forward. How do you know that? She moved her eyes to the parchment, careful not to touch it again. The date line above the seal marks a saint's feast that was not celebrated on that day in that period. And the closing formula of the script has a hesitation. A genuine scribe would not have paused there. It is out of rhythm. Carlo let out a sharp breath. This is absurd. She is a cleaner. She is repeating something she heard in a film. Lena felt the heat rise in her face, but she did not look at him. The materials are old. Whoever made this used real antique vellum and wax. The surface test would pass, but the composition does not match the century the charter claims to belong to. Carlo stood. Gustavo, this is a waste of time. Do not let a girl who polishes tables derail a deal that took months to prepare. Gustavo raised one hand. Carlo stopped speaking. Gustavo turned back to Lena. Who taught you to notice these details? Lena hesitated. She did not want to sound like she was boasting. I studied at the Archival Institute in Palermo. My work focused on Sicilian charters from the 17th century. I handled originals from the same noble house that used this crest. Carlo laughed under his breath. Very convenient. Lena felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, the same sting she had felt when she walked away from the university to help her family. She kept her voice steady. Whether it is convenient or not does not change the fact that the document is wrong. Carlo's jaw tightened. She is overstepping. She is imagining things. Gustavo watched them both, his gaze slow and careful. Then he stood and pointed toward the door. "Everyone out," he said. "Except her." The guards exchanged a quick glance. Carlo froze. "Gustavo, you cannot seriously entertain this. We have a schedule." "Out," Gustavo repeated. Carlo's face turned stiff with disbelief, but he obeyed, collecting his notes with jerky movements. The guards followed him. The door shut behind them, leaving Lena and Gustavo alone. He picked up his phone. "You will answer every question clearly," he said without raising his voice. "No guessing." Lena nodded once. He dialed a number from memory. When the call connected, his tone changed, growing sharper. "I need a comparison. Immediate. A charter from the noble house of Rinaldi, 17th century. Cross-check the motto spelling and the feast calendar. Send the results directly to me." Lena stood still as he paced to the far end of the room. He gave a brief description of the document and ended the call. Then he returned to the table. "You said the materials are real," he said. "Explain that." Lena folded her hands in front of her. "Some forgers use authentic fragments. They buy damaged charters or in used vellum sheets from old collections. Then they rebuild documents with modern ink aged by heat and pressure. The wax is melted from real seals and restamped using molds. To most people, the result looks perfect." Gustavo studied her as she spoke. "How long before this expert in Rome replies?" "Minutes," he said. He was hired for situations where precision matters. He leaned on the table. The distance between them felt smaller now. Not friendly, not hostile, just focused. The phone vibrated. Gustavo lifted it, skimmed the message, and let out a quiet sound that was almost a breath but carried the weight of a verdict. "She is correct," he said. He lowered the phone. His eyes settled on the parchment as if seeing it for the first time. The motto dates to the next century. The feast does not match. The script hesitates at the closing. He tapped the document once with his fingertip. "This is a forgery." He pressed a button on the table's intercom. "Freeze all transfers linked to the Rinaldi Coastal Agreement." Immediately, a voice confirmed the order. Carlo entered without being called, his composure strained. "What did the expert say?" "Gustavo, this delay is dangerous." Gustavo raised his head slowly. "You brought this charter to me." Carlo stiffened. "Through legitimate channels." "Who handled the authentication?" Carlo began listing names of consultants and international firms. His voice grew louder as if volume could restore authority. "Every test passed. Every signature was verified. Yet the charter is false." Gustavo stepped toward him. "You told me this deal was safe." Carlo's throat tightened. Someone must have interfered. "The trust will explain." Gustavo lifted a hand. "Stand down from every act of negotiation. Effective now." Carlo's mouth opened. "You cannot remove me from." "I can," Gustavo said. Carlo's face drained of color. He looked at Lena with a cold, sharp disbelief, as though he had never imagined she could cause a shift of this magnitude. Gustavo pointed to the door. "Wait outside." Carlo left without another word. When the door clicked shut, Gustavo turned back to Lena. His expression was no longer unreadable. It held something closer to calculation, as if he were measuring an unexpected resource. "Why are you cleaning rooms?" he asked quietly, "when you can read that seal better than men who consult for governments?" Lena lowered her eyes. "My family needed the income. My brother was sick. I left the university before finishing my specialization." "You walked away from your field to scrub floors." She nodded once. He studied her for a long moment. "You should not be doing that. Not with what you know." She felt her breath tighten. "I only said what I could prove. And you proved enough to stop a deal that could have cost me everything." His voice dropped. "That is not a small thing." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek card. "I need someone inside my organization who understands documents. Someone who can see the traps others hide in plain sight. A historian, an auditor, someone who cannot be fooled by a forged seal." Lena felt the room tilt slightly. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes. Starting now." Her mind raced. Leaving this room as his employee meant stepping into a world where decisions could be dangerous. Yet remaining a maid after seeing what she had seen would not make her safer. She imagined her professors in Palermo studying charters under lamplight. She imagined her father in the empty bakery, her brother recovering slowly. Gustavo placed a card on the table. I did not offer twice. The decision settled in her chest like a heavy coin. She reached out, picked up the card, and closed her fingers around it. Gustavo nodded once. Return your maid badge to management. Then come to the private elevator. My staff will take you to your new office. Her throat felt tight. Yes, signore. He walked toward the window and did not look back. Lena stepped out of the suite and made her way through the corridor. Staff members watched her with puzzled expressions as she approached the service desk. She removed her badge and placed it on the counter. The supervisor blinked at her, unsure what had happened or why, but Lena only offered a polite nod. She turned toward the private elevator, feeling the weight of every step. The elevator chimed gently, its doors opening to a space reserved for people who never passed through the hotel staff entrances. She stepped inside. As the doors closed, Lena wondered if she had escaped a thankless job or stepped willingly into something far more dangerous. The truth waited on the other side of the ride. The elevator rose in a smooth, almost soundless climb. When it stopped, the doors opened onto a quiet corridor lined with pale walls and dark carpets. There were no room numbers here, only discreet doors and a steady security camera at each end. A man in a simple dark suit waited by the nearest doorway. He had compact shoulders, an alert gaze, and the relaxed posture of someone who knew how to move quickly if needed. You must be Lena, he said. I am Rafi. His Italian carried a faint accent from further east. He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the open door behind him. Your office, he added. The boss prefers his experts close. The room inside was small but bright. A wide desk stood beneath a tall window that looked onto a portion of the harbor. A computer, a high-resolution scanner, and a flat lamp were arranged with careful order. Shelves along the wall already held folders labeled with dates and project codes. On the far side sat a woman in her 30s with dark hair, pulled back neatly, glasses resting on the bridge of her nose. This is Elena, Rafi said. She watches the numbers. You will see each other often. Elena rose and offered her hand. Her grip was firm, her smile brief but not unfriendly. I manage the accounts that belong to our companies, she said. Some are clean, some are less so. The goal is to keep us from stepping on mines we do not see. Lena set the card Gustavo had given her on the desk. The sight of it still felt unreal. Only that morning she had been ironing tablecloths. Gustavo asked me to explain the ground rules, Rafi said. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded loosely. First, tell the truth. He can work with bad news. He cannot work with flattery that hides a trap. Second, nothing you see in here leaves this floor without his permission. Not a copy, not a description, not a hint. Third, he paused. Some of the money you trace will never be clean. Your work is to make sure that, dirty or not, it does not blow up in his hands. Lena absorbed the words slowly. If I find something dangerous, you bring it to us, Elena answered. To me for the numbers. To Rafi if you think someone is trying to hurt him. He trusts very few people in this building. You are now on that short list. Use it carefully. Rafi straightened. We will bring the first batch of files in an hour. In the meantime, settle in. Learn your tools. When they left, the office fell quiet again. Lena ran her hand lightly over the scanner surface, then opened the top drawer. Inside lay a notebook, unused, waiting for ink. She sat, took a breath, and opened a blank document on the computer. The work began almost at once. Contracts arrived in stacked folders and digital scans. Shipping agreements routed through shell companies in distant ports. Purchase records for paintings and sculptures whose prices seemed designed to hide other transactions. Charters for foundations with noble names and vague missions. Lena read each page with the same patience she had once brought to ancient charters back in Palermo. Before long, she began to notice patterns. The word heritage appeared more often than coincidence would explain. Heritage restorations, heritage trusts, heritage corridors. Each project moved large sums of money while claiming to protect buildings or archives. Some were legitimate. Others felt like hollow shells built around a single line in a contract that shifted real power somewhere else. Whenever she raised a question, Elena came to stand beside her, tracing numbers along the margin with a pen. Or Rafi appeared in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes moving between the page and Lena's face. "Good catch," he would say when she pointed to a suspicious clause. "This one will need more background." Over the next days, Gustavo began asking for her presence in certain meetings. He would sit at the head of a small table. Lawyers and advisors gathered along the sides. Documents lay in front of him. He would listen to their presentations with half his attention on the words and the other half on Lena's reactions. She spoke only when asked, but even a single sentence from her could shift his decision. "Is this seal correct?" "Yes." "Are these dates coherent?" "No." "The calendar is wrong." He accepted her judgment without argument. The quiet trust unsettled her, yet she could not deny the strange sense of purpose it gave her. One late morning, as she sorted through a backlog of scanned deeds, the intercom on her desk buzzed. "Elena here," came the voice. "We have something new for you." A few minutes later, the accountant entered, followed by two men in suits pushing a crate on a small trolley. The crate was marked with the emblem of a heritage trust Lena had already seen in several files. The representative of the trust stepped in behind them. He was lean, with careful hair and a smooth tone that had sold many projects. He greeted Lena with a polite nod, though his eyes slid quickly over her office, noting every detail. "These are church ledgers and monastery grants from a valley in the south," he explained. "If our research is correct, they show that the state surveyors missed several parcels when the land was nationalized. Your employer can use them to establish ownership, in partnership with us, and receive generous tax treatment." Lena stepped nearer to the crate. Neatly bound volumes lay inside, their leather covers aged and cracked at the edges. "Gustavo will review the proposal," Elena said. "Our historian will first examine the documents." The man's gaze shifted to Lena. Surprise flickered there. "Your historian," he repeated. "Elena means me," Lena answered. He studied her for a second longer, then smiled as if the idea amused him. "Of course. We look forward to your confirmation." He left the room. The crate remained. Rafi arrived just as the workers finished placing the books on a side table. "From the same trust that brought us the false coastal charter," he said quietly. "Carlo approved these," Elena added. "He insists that every test came back clean." At the mention of Carlo, Lena felt a small tightening in her chest. She had seen him only at a distance since the day Gustavo halted the transfer. He moved through the corridors with stiffness, eyes colder than before, yet still carrying the authority of years spent by Gustavo's side. "I will start now," Lena said. When they were gone, she opened the first ledger. The pages were filled with entries of tithes, notes of land grants, and names of villages scattered along the valley. At a glance, it all seemed consistent. Yet as she turned the pages, a faint unease grew. The handwriting shifted slightly from volume to volume, as one would expect over decades. But within each book, she noticed certain flourishes that repeated with suspicious regularity. A particular twist of the letter G, a curve at the end of S, the way the ink thickened and thinned along longer strokes. It felt like one skilled hand imitating many, adjusting style, but never fully letting go of its own habits. She moved from ledger to ledger. In the margin of one, a faint line showed where a page had been cut and sewn into a different binding. Another page carried a watermark that did not match the year written at the top. Lena took notes, detailed and precise. She knew that a single discrepancy could be dismissed. A pattern could not. Midway through the third ledger, she felt something odd beneath her fingers. The spine of the book was thicker on one side than the other, not in the natural way of old bindings, but as if something narrow and rigid had been inserted. She hesitated, then fetched a small knife from her desk. Working carefully, she lifted a section of the inner cloth, just enough to see what lay beneath. A thin strip of pale material rested beside the spine, flat and smooth, Far too modern for a book that claimed to be 3 centuries old. Her heartbeat quickened. She wrapped the strip in a clean cloth and called Elena. The accountant arrived at once. Together they examined the binding, then the wrapped sliver. "This is not paper," Elena said. "Rafi should see this." Rafi entered moments later. Lena unfolded the cloth. He picked up the strip using the corner of a handkerchief and held it to the light. "I have seen something like this before," he said. "In security work. It might carry a chip." They took the strip to a small equipment room down the hall. Rafi drew a handheld scanner from a locked cabinet. When he passed it over the material, the device beeped softly. "There it is," he said. "Locator signal. Very small but active." Lena felt a chill. So whoever sent these books expects them to travel. Or to sit somewhere predictable, Rafi answered. "An office. A safe. A storage unit. Wherever they lie, someone can map the routes taken to reach that point." Elena crossed her arms. "They are not only trying to steal land. They want to track our movements." Rafi looked at Lena. "You understand what happens if we accuse people with this kind of reach in front of the wrong audience." She did. Documents could be dismissed. People could vanish. "Gustavo needs to hear it," she said. "And he needs to hear it while everyone who pushed these books is in the same room." Rafi studied her for a long second. "You are brave," he said, "or you have not yet learned to be afraid. Both, perhaps." He gave a small, reluctant smile. "Very well. We will arrange a meeting. The trust representative will be there. Carlo, too. But listen to me now. Once you show them what you have found, you will no longer be the maid they ignore. You will be the person who broke their plan. That is not a safe position." "Already crossed that line in the suite," she replied. "This is only the next page." They returned to her office. Lena photographed the repeated handwriting features, the altered margins, and the open binding. She printed the images and placed them in a slim folder. The locator strip went into a small envelope marked with the time and date. By late afternoon, word came that Gustavo had called a conference in the main meeting room. Key advisors would attend. So would the representative from the trust. Rafi appeared at her door. "Bring the ledgers," he said, "and your proof." Lena gathered the books in her arms, the weight of them solid and cold. In one hand, she held the folder with photographs. In her pocket lay the envelope that carried the tiny chip. She stepped into the corridor beside Rafi and walked toward the conference room, each footfall measured and steady. The ledgers felt less like old records now and more like evidence carried into a courtroom. Whatever waited behind that door would change the shape of Gustavo's world, perhaps the shape of hers as well. She tightened her grip and kept walking. The corridor ahead was silent, empty in a way that made every step sound louder than it should. When she reached the conference room, Rafi pushed the door open for her. Inside, the long table was already filled. Gustavo sat at the head, his posture controlled and unreadable. Carlo occupied the seat to his right, hands neatly folded, expression calm in a way that struck Lena as rehearsed. Several lieutenants lined the sides. At the far end, the Heritage Trust representative waited with the polished ease of a man who believed he held an advantage. All eyes turned toward her as she entered. "Begin," Gustavo said. Lena set the ledgers on the table one by one. Their aged covers looked genuine. Their pages looked ancient. To anyone else, these books were the jewels of an old monastery's past. She opened the first ledger and laid her notes beside it. "This script is supposed to span a century," she said, "but the same hand appears throughout." She pointed to several repeating flourishes. This twist in the letter G, this tail on the S. These are not variations of time. These are the habits of one writer imitating many. A murmur ran down the table. She moved to the second ledger. These margins were cut and re-sewn. "Look here." She slid the book toward the nearest lieutenant. A real ledger from this period would not carry a page with a watermark used 70 years later. She opened the third book last. "And this one," she said, "is not only forged." She lifted the envelope from her folder and set it in front of Gustav. The air in the room shifted. She peeled it open, revealing the slender strip she had found hidden in the binding. Its pale surface looked harmless. "This was stitched into the spine," she said. Elena tested it. "It carries a locator signal. These books were not created to support land claims. They were created to track whoever handled them. The room went still. One lieutenant slammed a hand on the table. We have been watched. Rafi stood in the back, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the trust representative. The representative lifted both palms. This is impossible. Our clients are reputable. Perhaps the maid misunderstood what she saw. The word maid struck the air sharply. Carlo shifted in his seat. No misunderstanding, Lena said. Her tone was steady even as her pulse quickened. These books were built to follow routes, not history. Carlo leaned forward. Or perhaps you are overreaching. These ledgers came through legitimate channels. Experts examine them. You see patterns because that is your training, not because they exist. Gustavo turned his head slowly toward him. Something cold settled in his stare. You vouch for these. Carlo gave a measured shrug. Based on the tests. If someone fooled the laboratories, we should blame them, not accuse partners without proof. Lena looked between them. Carlo's calm did not come from confusion. It came from control, from certainty that he could talk his way through the storm. Gustavo broke the silence. Enough. He closed the ledger in front of him with a single firm motion. The Valley deal is canceled, he said. All communication with the trust stops now. The representative opened his mouth to argue, but Gustavo lifted a hand. I asked for authenticity. You deliver a trap. We are finished. He turned to Rafi. I want every name involved in the Coastal Charter and these ledgers. Everyone who handled them. Everyone who financed them. Follow the representative until I say stop. And keep an eye on Carlo. Carlo stiffened at the last instruction, but he said nothing. Lena felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. Once again, a single sentence, a single discovery, had shifted millions and angered people who did not forgive easily. The meeting dissolved into low voices as men pushed back their chairs. Rafi guided Lena out first, guarding her path from the room. When they stepped into the corridor, he glanced at her with a look that mixed admiration and worry. You just cost dangerous people a fortune, he said quietly. Be careful tonight. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Hours later, she stood in the staff area of the Grand Mirador. The locker she had used for 2 years was half open, empty except for a spare apron she no longer needed. A few co-workers hugged her, surprised but supportive. No one understood what she had stepped into, only that she was leaving the hotel for something else. She left by the service entrance as always. The late evening air was cool, carrying the scent of the harbor. At the bottom of the ramp, Gustavo's convoy waited. 2 dark cars, a driver leaning against one. Rafi standing near the door, scanning the shadows. Come straight in, he called. Gustavo wants to speak tonight. She started down the ramp. The van appeared as a blur of metal and speed. Tires screamed. The sliding door yanked open as it swung toward the convoy. Gunfire erupted. Rafi lunged, pulling her hard behind a catering truck. The impact knocked the breath out of her. Glass shattered across the pavement. Bullets tore through the side of Gustavo's lead car. One of the drivers cried out and collapsed against the door. Lena pressed against the cold metal of the truck, heart hammering. She could hear attackers shouting in short bursts, rounds firing in quick rhythm. Rafi returned fire with sharp precision. Gustavo's guards responded from the second car, forcing the attackers to retreat. The van peeled away with a shriek of tires and sped into the darkness. For a moment, the loading bay echoed with nothing but the fading sound of an engine. Rafi rose from cover and checked the wounded driver. He is still breathing, he said. We need to move now. He guided Lena into the second car. The door shut. The convoy sped away from the hotel, lights extinguished, turning down narrow streets until the bay and its danger were behind them. They arrived at a safe house on the quieter side of the city. Inside, the lamps gave off a soft golden glow. A medic tended to the driver while Gustavo paced the room, jaw tight, tie loosened. When he saw Lena, he stopped. They used the chip, she said. Her voice was thin from adrenaline. They waited for the books to be delivered. They knew when you would send the car for me. Gustavo exhaled slowly. Then this is not about land. Not anymore. Elena arrived minutes later, carrying a small bag of evidence. She emptied it onto the table. Shredded paper fragments, edges curled from heat. A patrol found the attacker's van burning by the river, she said. Inside this, Lena sifted through the pieces. The texture, the ink, the faint wax stains. They matched the forged ledgers. They wanted to erase the trail, she said. Rafi closed the safe house door. Someone inside your circle gave the route and time, he said to Gustavo. Only a handful knew. A silence, heavy and certain, settled over the room. Betrayal was not outside. It was close, closer than any bullet. And the paper war had just turned real. Lena sat at the safe house table while Elena spread the recovered fragments across a clean sheet. Gustavo stood near the window, the street lights casting thin bars of gold across his face. The silence in the room carried more tension than the gunfire that had torn through the loading bay. We tracked the source, he said at last. Every name, every payment, every hand that touched these documents. His eyes moved to Rafi, then to Lena. You two handle this together. Full access. No restrictions. Rafi nodded once. We will need Elena for the accounts. I expected that, Gustavo said. She joins the team. Elena pulled up her laptop and began sorting digital records. The safe house walls soon transformed into an evidence board. Printed bank transfers, old seals, photographs of the forged charter, the locator chip, and the shredded fragments were pinned in careful rows. Lines of string connected shell companies to heritage trusts and trusts to consultants who appeared in more than one transaction. Lena stepped back, studying the emerging pattern. Someone built a network with care, she said. Enough steps to make the source look distant. But not distant enough, Elena replied. Some of these accounts feed into each other. Rafi added a new sheet, and they all drain into the same region. Gustavo walked closer. Find the hand behind them. They worked late into the night. It was Lena who noticed the recurring name in the transfers. Paolo Marani. Amounts paid in irregular intervals. Notes that reference conservation work and paper restoration. Who is he? Rafi asked. An art restorer, Lena said. Very good at aging paper. He used to appear in seminar footnotes at the Institute. Known for repairing damaged folios. And for working quietly, Elena added. He has no public sight. His clients contact him through intermediaries. Flights, Rafi said, scrolling through intercepted data. He was in the city the week before the coastal charter appeared. And again before the valley ledgers were delivered, Elena confirmed. Lena felt a chill move through her. He is not only restoring, he is building things from fragments. Then we go find him, Rafi said. The next morning they drove south along the coast. The city thinned into low hills and warehouse districts. Farther out, the road curved toward a smaller port town lined with aging boats and narrow streets. Paolo's studio was in a converted warehouse painted a fading shade of blue, its windows obscured by dust. Rafi unlocked the door with quiet force, then stepped inside first. The air smelled of chemicals, old varnish, and damp wood. Light filtered through one cracked skylight, casting a pale beam across the floor. On a long table near the wall, scraps of 17th century vellum were arranged in careful piles. Some held faint ink traces. Others bore old stains of wax. A heat press stood nearby, still warm. Lena approached slowly. These matched the paper used in the valley ledgers. She picked up a photograph resting beneath a weight. It showed a nearly complete charter mid-forgery. The wording had been altered several times in pencil. The wax seal in the image bore the same crest she had seen in the hotel. He was producing them in sets, she whispered. Rafi moved toward a half-open door at the back. The darkness inside made him stop. Lena followed, her heart bracing for what she sensed before she saw it. Paolo lay on the floor. His body was curled on its side, one arm tucked beneath him as if he had tried to shield himself. His clothes were rumpled. There was no police tape, no marked perimeter, only the faint, sharp smell of a cleaner used to wipe surfaces. Rafi knelt and shook his head. Dead for days. Someone wanted his work erased before anyone found him. A shelf beside the body was empty except for a few cords. A missing hard drive, Elena said from the doorway. Everything digital removed. Rafi studied the floor. See this? The way they cleaned the footprints with water, but not the corners. He pointed to faint arcs that caught the light. This is how some of our people clean after internal disputes. Only someone familiar with our methods would imitate it. Lena stared at Paolo's still form. He was silenced by someone who knew he was a loose thread. She stepped back, trying to keep her thoughts steady. Something about the room felt incomplete. Too neat. Too deliberate. She scanned the walls again. A small wooden board near the window looked slightly lifted. She moved toward it, slid her fingers beneath the edge, and pulled it gently aside. Behind it was a notebook. She carried it to the main table and opened it with care. Inside were numbered entries, each naming a task, a client, a payment. Some were labeled with initials she recognized as corporate fronts traced to Gustavo's empire. Elena leaned over her shoulder. These entries matched the payment transfers. The final page held fresh ink. CV approved. Heritage Board liaison next week. Drafts ready. The letter struck Lena like a blow. CV, Carlo Ventresca. Rafi looked grim. So the forger was not working alone. He had inside approval. Lena ran her finger along the page. These deals were designed to shift control slowly, one signature at a time. They gathered the notebook and photographs, locking the studio behind them as they left. The drive back to the city felt heavier. The coastal view passed in a blur, yet Lena barely saw the water. Her mind replayed every conversation with Carlo, every moment she had dismissed as formality, every small comment he had made about heritage work and the value of old paperwork. Inside the safe house, Elena laid the notebook beside the printed bank transfers. Rafi connected the initials to every transaction. There is no doubt, he said. CV is Carlo. And these consultancies, Elena added, pointing to the overlapping accounts, are the same ones Carlo used when handling overseas negotiations. Lena stood at the edge of the table, her eyes fixed on the single word at the top of the page. Approval. The betrayal reached deeper than she had imagined. And the person guiding the attacks was someone Gustavo trusted more than anyone else. The air inside the safe house felt tighter as Lena stood before the evidence board. The notebook, bank records, and marked transfers formed a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. When Gustavo stepped into the room, he paused at the sight of the map of his own world displayed like a snare. Rafi nodded once. We found the source. Lena opened the notebook to the page with the initials. She handed it to Gustavo. His eyes moved down the entries with a slow, controlled focus. When he reached the line with CV, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This notebook was hidden behind a wall panel, Lena said. Paolo wrote down every job. Elena added, and these transfers match Carlo's consulting accounts, the same accounts used for the coastal charter. Gustavo closed the notebook with a quiet click. Carlo has been with my family since I was a boy. His voice did not rise, but the weight in it was unmistakable. He taught me to read contracts when I was 13. Rafi stepped forward. This evidence is not opinion. Lena pointed to the strings between several documents on the board. If you look at the sequence, each forged charter leads toward a transfer that weakens your control. Some shift ownership into trusts managed through offshore boards. I checked those boards. Carlo sits on 2 of them. She walked to the coastal charter pinned near the top. If you had signed this one, most of the land rights would have moved into a trust controlled by an outside board. On paper, you would appear to be the primary beneficiary. In reality, you would lose access once the transfer settled. And the valley ledgers? Gustavo asked. Lena lifted one of the blown-up images. They create a false chain of ownership. If you sign the supporting documents, you would be directly responsible for claiming property that never belonged to you. Authorities could prosecute you for fraud. Rafi folded his arms, and the rival clan would inherit what remained. Clean, legal. Gustavo turned to him. You have proof the rival family is involved. Rafi retrieved a file from the table. Intelligence reports show contact between Carlo and their liaison. Meetings arranged through the same heritage trust that brought you the ledgers. They have been trying to take your ports for years. This is a slower method, but more effective. Elena added, the trust sits in the center of it all. It provides a respectable appearance. Anyone investigating would see philanthropy and cultural restoration. Lena walked closer to the board. The 4 charters are part of Cage, a legal one. Once you sign enough of them, you would be tied personally to documents that could put you in prison. Carlo would not need violence. The signatures alone would undo you. Gustavo stared at the board for a long time. The tension around his eyes revealed the battle between memory and logic. Loyalty had been carved into him from childhood. Yet the paper trail stripped sentiment away and left only facts. Rafi broke the silence. The attack at the hotel confirms it. They were trying to close the trap. He needed you gone before you questioned the signatures. And if I had died, Gustavo said quietly, the Heritage Trust and a rival clan would control the rest. Lena felt an uneasy shift inside her. She knew what came next for Gustavo, but she also understood what came next for her. The deeper she went into this world, the more her work protected him, not the public records she valued. Her voice felt small when she spoke. If I stay, she said, I help you reinforce your position. But leaving now would mean abandoning the trail that leads to land theft and corruption. If the trust stays untouched, families will lose everything in future deals. Gustavo looked at her, expression unreadable. What do you choose? Lena held his stare. I stay, but I will keep copies of everything. My loyalty is to the truth in these documents, not to any empire. A faint nod passed between them. Not approval, not affection, a recognition that both understood the cost of their choices. Rafi brought out a map and placed it on the table. If we move against Carlo here, in the city, his allies will interfere. He has people in the Port Authority and in the Heritage Board. He will see us coming. Then we do not confront him here, Gustavo said. Lena looked up. Where? There is a hunting lodge in the hills, he said. Old, quiet. He thinks it is a place for strategy and planning. I will ask him to meet there to discuss damage control. He will come. He trusts me. The thought of sitting across from a man who had orchestrated the fraud sent a tremor through Lena, but she did not step back. I need to be there, she said. Gustavo studied her face. Why? Because the trap he built is made of clauses and dates and seals. You need someone who understands the structure. If he lies, I will hear where the lie begins. Rafi frowned. It will not be safe. It has not been safe since the night of the first charter, Lena said. And you know it. Rafi nodded reluctantly. Gustavo placed both palms on the table. Prepare what you need. Lena went to her office in the safe house and filled a folder with photocopies of forged clauses, margin comparisons, and a page from Paolo's notebook. She tucked a small recording device in her coat pocket. As she zipped the folder closed, a strange calm settled over her. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her movements. Before dawn, they gathered at the garage beneath the safe house. Fog clung low over the city, swallowing the streetlights. The engines of 3 dark cars hummed in the cold air. Rafi checked the perimeter one last time. Elena handed Lena a small envelope containing backup contact numbers. Gustavo stepped out of the shadows and opened the rear door of the lead car. Time to go. Lena climbed inside. The door shut with a quiet thud, sealing her in a world she never imagined entering. The convoy rolled out of the city, climbing into the hills where the fog thickened and the roads narrowed. Pines rose on either side, their dark branches bending toward the path ahead. The lodge waited somewhere beyond the mist, a place chosen not for comfort, but for truth that could no longer hide. The convoy moved deeper into the hills until the trees thickened on both sides of a narrow road. Patches of mist drifted between the trunks, and the first pale light of morning broke through in uneven stretches. When the car slowed, Lena saw the lodge ahead. It stood alone on a rocky slope, built of dark stone and timber that had weathered many winters. Pines circled it like sentinels. There was nothing welcoming about it. Its silence felt deliberate, as though it had witnessed confessions before and would do so again. Inside, the main room was spare. A plain wooden table stood at the center with a brass lamp that cast a steady circle of gold across its surface. 2 chairs faced each other. A third had been placed slightly off to the side for Lena. The guard stayed outside, but close enough to intervene if anything shifted. Rafi guided Lena to the smaller room behind the hall. "I will monitor from here," he said. "You will not be alone." She nodded. The folder of evidence felt heavier than usual in her hands. Gustavo joined her a moment later. The cold outside had left a faint flush on his face, but his expression was steady. "We go through the plan once more," he said. Lena opened the folder and laid out the forgery comparisons. "I will start with the coastal charter clauses, then move to the valley ledgers. Each question will ask for a name or a date that only the architect of the forgery would know. And when he tries to redirect," Gustavo said, "you bring him back with the notebook." "He will try to deny the initials," Lena said. "We should expect that. That is why you will speak first," Gustavo replied. "You understand the structure. You know where the lies sit." Rafi stood with his arms crossed, listening. "If he raises his voice or moves too quickly, I come in." Gustavo's gaze hardened. "If he raises a hand, he does not leave this building." They fell silent at the sound of tires on gravel. Someone had arrived. Lena's breath tightened. She gathered the folder and returned to the main room with Gustavo. The lodge door opened, and Carlos stepped inside. He looked as he always had, controlled, composed. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed. His tie sat neatly against his shirt, but his eyes carried a strain she had not noticed before, as if the last weeks had carved deeper lines across his features. "Gustavo," he said with a nod. "I came as soon as I received your message." "No delay," Gustavo replied. "I appreciate that." Carlo took a seat. "You said we should assess the situation in private. The recent attacks, the failed documents, the trust pulling away. I have ideas. We can repair this." He said it calmly, like nothing had been exposed, like nothing had changed. Lena watched him carefully. Every word he spoke came out with practiced ease. Not hesitation, not fear. Conviction built from years of believing he could speak his way through anything. Gustavo leaned back slightly. "Before we discuss solutions, I want your thoughts on the fraud attempts." Carlo folded his hands. "The coastal charter was a strike from outside. Someone wanted to weaken your position. And the Valley books were another attempt, likely coordinated by the same group. We should step back from heritage matters for now. They are becoming liabilities." His tone carried concern, even loyalty. It was almost convincing. Lena saw the lie beneath it. Gustavo nodded slowly. "You think retreat is the answer?" "For now," Carlos said. "We gather strength, cut ties with anyone who might be compromised, build new routes that avoid attention." Lena felt her jaw tighten. He spoke as though the attacks had come from strangers, as though he had not approved every step of those forged portfolios. She kept still, her hands resting lightly on the folder. Gustavo shifted forward. He placed Paolo's notebook on the table and slid it across the wood. Carlo's eyes flicked to it. A brief moment, a fraction, but enough. "What is this?" he asked. "You tell me," Gustavo said quietly. Carlo opened it. His thumb paused on the page marked with CV. His expression did not change, but the silence that followed made his heart beat louder than his words had been. "These are scribbles," he said lightly. "Conjecture from a frightened man, not evidence." Lena watched his hands. They tightened just slightly on the book's spine. "Then explain the overlapping accounts," Gustavo said. He placed the printed bank transfers beside the notebook. "Your consultancies support every payment." Carlo looked at the papers. His controlled calm began to thin. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough for Lena to see the first crack. "These are routine," he said. "There are hundreds of transfers every week. You cannot assign meaning to them without context." "That is what I thought," Gustavo said, "which is why I brought her." Carlo's gaze snapped to Lena. Surprise flashed across his face, then irritation. She should not be part of this. She does not understand how these structures work. Lena opened her folder. Quietly, deliberately. She tapped her phone screen beneath the table, starting the recording app without breaking eye contact with her documents. Then she spoke. "This clause," she said, placing the copied page from the coastal charter on the table, "is designed to invalidate the preceding chain of ownership. No heritage trust would insert a clause that breaks the continuity of a land right it claims to protect." Carlo lifted his chin. "You are misreading it." She placed the next sheet on the table. The Valley ledgers use handwriting that matches the coastal charter drafts. A single writer, imitating several centuries. Look here. She traced the repeating flourish. This pattern appears in all three. Carlo's composure faltered further. Many scribes share similar habits. Not across centuries, Lena said. Not with the same spacing errors. And not stitched with a locator chip. She placed the photograph of the chip beside the ledger comparison. Gustavo watched Carlo with an expression that held no warmth. Carlo's breath grew unsteady. It was the first real sign of fear. Lena continued, her voice steady. These structures were designed to move assets into boards where you hold quiet positions. The clauses would expose Gustavo directly while keeping your name absent. And the timing of the attacks matches the discovery of each forgery. Carlo's eyes shifted to the notebook again. The page with CV seemed to stare back at him. For the first time since entering the lodge, he looked cornered. The lamp on the table flickered slightly, casting moving shadows across his face. He glanced toward the door, as if calculating an escape, but he knew there were guards outside. Slowly, he looked back at Lena. "You," he said, voice thickening. "You read too much. You should have stayed in housekeeping." Lena held his gaze. "You built these documents thinking no one would ever see the flaws. But I saw them." And in that instant, Carlo understood. The maid he had dismissed was the only one in the room who could dismantle every step of the plot he had crafted. His face drained of certainty as the truth settled like cold iron between them. Lena watched the moment he realized that the documents he thought would stay unread had finally found their reader. Carlo shifted in his chair. For the first time since arriving at the lodge, he looked smaller. Still composed, still calculating, but shaken in a way he could no longer hide. He cleared his throat. "These entries in the notebook do not prove anything. Paolo took instructions from several consultants. I passed messages along. Nothing more." Lena opened the next folder and placed 2 pages on the table. "You contacted him first," she said. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but every detail in her hand was a blade. "This message directing him to prepare a draft is from your secondary account. The routing number matches the consultancy you used when negotiating in Naples." Carlo's face tightened. "You are misinterpreting. That is a coincidence." She laid down the next sheet. "The dates are not coincidences. This message approving a second version of the Coastal Charter arrived 1 day after the Heritage Trust sent you their revised land survey. And this signature here is yours. You forgot to disguise the final flourish." Carlo hesitated, then forced a weak smile. "She has an eye for patterns, Gustavo. That does not make them true." Gustavo said nothing. He sat back, watching, letting Lena's voice fill the room like a slow tide. His silence made Carlo more nervous than any threat could have. Lena placed a photograph of the altered seal beside the ledgers. "You approved all 3 drafts. The same instructions, the same corrections. Paolo followed your revisions." Carlo exhaled sharply. "I only passed along notes from external experts. You cannot put this on me." Gustavo leaned forward. "Then name those experts." Carlo opened his mouth, closed it again. The room shifted. A faint tremor moved across his fingers. His control was slipping. Lena placed the final sheet in front of him. The locator chip was sewn into the ledger binding before the courier left the trust. The technician who handled the scanning equipment was hired through one of your shell companies. You arranged that contact. The last pretense fell away. Carlo stared at the table, jaw clenched, breath unsteady. Gustavo did not speak. He waited. Carlo finally lifted his head. His voice had lost its firmness. "You were blinded by your obsession with written contracts. You built everything on signatures. On paper. Anyone could have turned that against you." He looked at Lena with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. "And you saw it all. A maid with knowledge she should never have had." "Why?" Gustavo said quietly. The question cut the room in half. Carlo looked at him, and something old and weary flickered in his eyes. "Because you were reckless. You were young when the routes became yours. You trusted too easily. You acted too quickly. I held the family stable. And you pushed us toward deals that drew attention. Someone had to think about the legacy." Gustavo's jaw clenched. "So you sold pieces of it behind my back." Carlo's voice rose, thin with frustration. I guided you for years. I built your networks. You think any of these men follow you without the weight of my name behind yours? I did not want to destroy you. I wanted to replace you when the moment came. You rely on force and instinct. I rely on structure. And the attack at the hotel, Gustavo said. Was that structure? Carlos swallowed. That was supposed to be the end. Quick, clean. You would fall, and the rest would shift quietly into trusts controlled by respectable boards. By the time authorities arrived, everything questionable would sit in your name. Not mine. Lena felt a coldness settle in the room. The betrayal was complete. Not a misunderstanding. Not an accident. A plan crafted with patience and certainty. Gustavo stood slowly. He walked around the table, stopping behind Carlos' chair. You helped raise me, he said. You stood beside my father. You taught me how contracts work, how power works. And all this time, you were building a trap. Carlo lowered his eyes. For the good of the legacy. For the good of yourself, Gustavo said. Silence held for a long moment. Then Gustavo turned to Rafi, who stepped forward from the side room, expression firm. He does not die here, Gustavo said. He will be handed to the financial police, the quiet unit, the one that owes me favors. They will take the forged documents, the recording, the notebook. In exchange for complete cooperation, he will live under guard for the rest of his life. Carlo's breath caught. You cannot expect me to survive in custody. You will, Gustavo said, because I said you will. But you will never touch my world again. Rafi signaled 2 guards waiting outside. They entered, took Carlo by the arms, and lifted him to his feet. He did not struggle. He simply stared at Lena, silent and pale, as if still unable to comprehend that she had done what no advisor, no consultant, no rival had managed. As the guards led him toward the door, he paused for a heartbeat. You have no idea what you have changed, he said softly. Lena met his gaze. I know exactly what I changed. The guards pulled him outside. When the door closed, the room felt lighter and heavier at the same time. The tension had broken, but the damage it revealed still echoed through the air. Rafi spoke first. What now? Now we clean the network, Gustavo said. The rest of the day moved quickly. Calls were made. Orders sent. Rafi's team spread across the city. Heritage boards collapsed under the weight of warrants. Accounts froze. Several officials connected to the rival clan were taken into custody. Others vanished before dawn. Every action followed the maps and diagrams Lena had drawn across weeks of work. By evening, the network that had threatened to crush Gustavo had been dismantled. Lena stood beside the evidence board as Gustavo approached with a sealed envelope. He handed it to her. This is a complete copy of everything, he said. Every forged clause, every transfer, every message. If anything happens to me, you give this to the authorities. Lena brushed her fingers across the envelope. You trust me with this. You already have the power to destroy me, he said. I'm only acknowledging it. She closed the envelope gently. You already know which documents I am willing to sign. Their eyes held for a moment. No warmth, no hostility, a shared understanding that did not need more words. Outside, she heard the distant sound of gravel as a car pulled away. Carlo's car, headed toward a place he would never leave. The lodge emptied slowly after that. The guards packed equipment. Rafi locked the side rooms. Gustavo stepped outside into the fading light without looking back. Lena remained a moment longer, staring at the empty chair where Carlo had sat. The circle of lamplight on the table had not dimmed, but the room felt changed, as if the truth he had carried had seeped into the walls. It felt like the end of one story, and the beginning of another. In the months that followed Carlo's removal, the city moved quietly around the fallout. Most of the work happened behind closed doors. Financial authorities traced connections between heritage boards and offshore accounts. Some officials cooperated as soon as warrants appeared. Others vanished before dawn, leaving empty desks and half-packed offices behind them. Gustavo's organization took hits. Profits dipped. Several fronts collapsed in days. Yet the collapse revealed where the weak points had been hiding. Shell companies dissolved. Old arrangements were severed. The people who depended on the easy shadow of Carlo's influence found themselves cut off. What remained after the clearing felt smaller but sturdier. Lena watched these changes from her office, now twice the size as before, with steady access to every contract that involved land, art, or cultural property. The work was constant. She reviewed inscriptions, cross-checked signatures, flagged suspicious surveys, and foundation deeds. For the first time, Gustavo insisted that no charter entered his empire without passing her hands. It did not solve everything. It did not erase what he had been, but it changed the pattern. Some shipping lines were sold to legitimate firms under new regulations. Others were consolidated into operations that would withstand scrutiny. The loudest, most reckless routes were abandoned entirely. Construction projects and logistics partnerships took their place. These did not need secrecy. They needed paperwork done correctly, and Lena provided that. One afternoon, Gustavo walked into her office with a document his lawyers had drafted. "This is for you," he said. She read the header. A trust registered in Sicily. A fund seeded with a portion of the profits recovered after the fraud network collapsed. "What is it supporting?" she asked. "Archives," he replied. "Municipal ones. University ones. Anyone who needs restoration, digital scanning, or staff. You decide the rest." She set the document down. "This foundation must stay separate from your accounts." "It will," he said. "Your name alone goes on the board." She felt a quiet, grounding certainty settle in her chest. Something in her life was coming full circle. She signed on the last page. Back home, the foundation transformed her family's future with a gentleness she had never expected. Her mother cried when the debts were paid. Her father reopened a small bakery near the institute, far humbler than the old one, but steady. Students stopped by for warm bread on their way to the reading rooms. Her younger brother recovered little by little. When he was strong enough, he began training as a technician in a small archive lab that partnered with the foundation. He learned to maintain scanners. He learned how to handle fragile bindings. He learned what documents meant to people who had almost lost them. Lena visited him often. Every time she saw him carefully adjusting the scanner arm, she felt something settle inside her. Not pride, something quieter, something like restoration. One evening, Gustavo asked her to meet him on a low rooftop overlooking the harbor. The sun had dropped behind the hills, leaving a band of amber light across the water. Boats drifted toward their moorings. The city hummed below. He stood by the railing, hands resting lightly on the metal. "You change how I look at power," he said. "I used to measure it in routes and territory. Now I see it in signatures, in the harm a single false clause can do." Lena leaned beside him. "Paper tells the truth in the end, even when people try to hide behind it." He nodded. "You could still expose my past." "Yes," she said. "One day I may have to choose between protecting you and protecting the people those documents belong to." He did not look offended, only thoughtful. "And when that day comes, I will choose what protects the records," she said, "not the person." He accepted it with a single quiet breath. The honesty sat between them like an agreement made stronger because no one had demanded it. Months later, a financial magazine published a short piece about the foundation in Sicily. It described a new initiative restoring municipal archives that had nearly collapsed under neglect. It mentioned a quiet woman named Lena Boni who once stopped a major fraud with a single sentence in a hotel suite. The article did not name Gustavo. It simply hinted at a powerful figure who changed course after realizing he had almost signed his own destruction. Lena read the piece once, folded the page, and placed it on her desk. On the foundation's website, her photograph appeared beside a simple statement she had written herself. Real ink, real records, real lives. One afternoon, she stood in the reading room of the institute where she had once been a student. Bright desk lamps illuminated rows of genuine charters. Students bent over them with careful hands, tracing letters she had studied years before. Through the tall windows, she could see the harbor. Somewhere in the city, men like Gustavo now checked every seal twice. Not because they feared her, but because they understood the cost of believing what looked perfect. Lena watched the students turn pages slowly, reverently. And she knew the story she had stepped into had given her something she thought she had lost. A way to protect the truth. A way to honor the records. a way back to herself.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.